Hey everybody, welcome back to Facts Remain. I am Misty Winston, joined by my co-host Jesse Zerwell. Today we have a very interesting and frustrating case to discuss with you guys, and it is the case of Aubrey Dameron, who is an Indigenous and transgendered woman who went missing in 2019. This is a really frustrating case. The manner in which the cops handled this one is going to get me feisty, so I'm going to warn you guys about that in advance. As I think we said this last week or the last 2 weeks ago, a lot of these cases you're going to hear us complaining about really poor police work. It's kind of a pretty consistent through line through a lot of these cases. So I'm excited to jump into this one. Again, it is really frustrating though. This one is pretty bad. Okay, so Aubrey Dameron, as we mentioned, is transgender. I kind of hesitate. I didn't know if we should mention her dead name because it's, potentially relevant to the case. I don't know if everybody needs the information. If you want to find it, you can find it. I don't really feel like it's all that necessary. But Aubrey was awesome. She was a lot of fun. She loved to sing. She loved to dance. She was kind of a performer and entertainer. And her uncle is actually, they're only 6 months apart. So they kind of grew up together. They were like best friends. And they both came out as gay at the same time. And then eventually she came out as transgender and then started the process of transitioning. So where should we jump into this at? I guess.
Well, we should say that we are going to try to refer to her in the present tense since
Yes.
she's still missing. So we're going to use is rather than was. We might slip up, but even though her family speaks about her in the past tense quite often, we think that
We
right
don't
was
know.
reserved for them. We don't know. So with regard to trying to be as accurate as possible, we're going to use is. But again, if we happen to use was or some other past tense form, it's a slip up.
Yes, it is. And I think that, as sad as it is to say it out loud, it is almost certainly was. But we don't know for sure. She is just still missing. It's highly unlikely. That's just the reality of things. After like the first 3 hours of somebody being missing, the chances of finding them alive are slim to none. That's just a statistic, thing. That's just the way that it is. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality where we are. But we will try to use is because, again, we do not know. She is just still missing. So I almost slipped up and said murdered. Jesus. So yeah, like I said, Aubrey was, I should pull up, let me see. Oops, wrong button. Let me pull up one of the missing posters so that you guys can see a photo. There's also a lot of information on this flyer, in terms of like phone numbers and stuff that you can call. So did that come up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, on some it does and some it doesn't. It's really annoying. Okay, so Aubrey, as I said, she was born on 10/22/1993. She's 5'10". I've seen some also say 6 foot, but this is the official flyer, so I'm going to go with 5'10". At the time that she went missing, she was 140 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, and her nickname was Shorty. She actually had a tattoo of the name Shorty on her left arm. And then also the symbol that you see in the middle there, that was on the middle part of her upper back. And then again, you'll see on the left that there are the phone numbers that you can call for the Cherokee Marshals and also for the Delaware County Sheriff's Office. I would probably call the Cherokee Marshals because the Delaware County Sheriff's Office has completely botched this case. I'm sure that will surprise nobody. So this is what she looked like. Obviously, she was gorgeous. Again, a lot of fun. Loved to sing, loved to dance. Seriously, like a hardcore entertainer. Very confident. Also kind of an empath, I think, or at least very like in tune with other people. It may be because she dealt with bullying and things, and so she was always able to recognize when other people were feeling uncomfortable or whatever. But she was very good at recognizing when people needed a friend, I think. And her family speaks of her incredibly highly. They loved her. She was a lot of fun, and very into her family. Like she loved her family, and her friends. She was very like a loyal person. So that is what she looks like. Please share this information around as much as possible. Um,
And you can
yes.
see on the right that Facebook post, her family often posts to Facebook with updates and entreaties to the public to come forward if they know something. And you can see this one right here, how haunting it is. This was posted near the end of the year. She went missing.
Yeah. So she went missing in March. This is in December. Um, and I can't imagine, like, because I'm a true crime nerd, I've often had that thought of, I think it would be just so much worse to have a family member or a loved one be missing rather
Mhm.
than knowing they've been murdered. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird, but I think the not knowing would destroy me.
Yeah. And people often talk about closure. And I think that closure means different things to different people. You know, if the family did find her body, if that were the unfortunate thing that happened, it's not like they'd necessarily get closure from that, but at least they would know where she is, as
Yeah,
opposed to now when it's just like this post says, no one vanishes into thin air. And I can only imagine the torture of the not knowing.
I can't. I really can't. I cannot even begin to put myself into that situation. So, and especially when you are part of a marginalized group, Indigenous Americans. This is in Oklahoma. It, you know, you're not going to get help from law enforcement, and that's very much the case here, which we'll get into. So that is who Aubrey is. Obviously that's not the entirety of who she is, but it is kind of difficult to find more information about her. There's a couple different articles. There's a podcast called Broken, which did an interview with both her aunt and also her uncle, who that's the one I mentioned before, who was there's just 6 months apart. So they grew up together. So they're basically more like siblings. But they were very close. And those were really good interviews, I think. So I just watched those or listened to those today. I don't have those in the description as of yet, but I'll put them in after we wrap. I just didn't have a chance to. So I guess we should talk a little bit about the fact that Aubrey she wasn't perfect. She had some issues. She had some substance abuse issues. Her family, her mother and brother also had some issues as well. That plays into the reason why the cops decided that she wasn't worth looking for. So, I mean, she had some struggles like we all do. And she dealt with a lot of bullying. Obviously, I'm sure nobody will be surprised by that, being a transgendered woman in the United States of America, especially in Oklahoma. I'm sure that wasn't easy for her. But to kind of tell you a little bit about the kind of person she was, her aunt tells a story about how, Aubrey would tell her about things that people were saying to her about experiences that she was having with bullying, and her aunt would get really mad, like, well, who is this? And like, one of those, do we need to kill him? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like one of those kinds of things. And Aubrey just would, kind of brush it off, and she would say that I'm just going to pray for them. And she kind of really tried to take all of those things in stride, and to just, move on and to not let it get to her as much as possible. Although I'm sure it did. I don't think that any human being could experience that kind of thing and not be impacted, you
Yeah.
know?
But it seems like she was focused, or I guess I have to use was here, or is focused on the bigger picture. And she wanted to become an actress or a dancer, some sort of entertainer. And it seems like her eye was on that prize, and
Yeah.
she knew the blows that were going to come with being a transgender woman. And I think, or it seems she felt like, I'm going to take these blows, I'm going to get past this, I'm going to keep my eye on the prize, and I'm going to get there. And but as you said, I imagine that all of the criticism and the bullying and whatever other forms of abuse she was subject to must have taken some sort of toll.
For sure. I mean, again, I don't know how you could be a human being and deal with that level of bullying and not have it impact you. So I think that she did her best to, like you said, stay focused and just kind of surround herself with people that understood her and cared about her and loved her and appreciated who she was or is. Sorry, guys. And I mean, that's all you really can do in those situations, I think. But I think really it just speaks to her character where, I'm just going to pray for them. I mean, I'm not a religious person myself, but I think that that's, a very compassionate response to that level of abuse, and for her to recognize that it was just something that was outside of her control and that all she can do is just, all you can control is the way that you react in those situations. But yeah, she dealt with some stuff and she wasn't perfect. She had some issues, as we all do. But that kind of leads us to something that I'm going to get feisty about because this pisses me off in the biggest way. I'm a true crime nerd. This is something that has bothered me for many, 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 many years. The high risk lifestyle. I cannot tell you how disgusted it makes me. And it's not just in Aubrey's case. This happens all the time. If there is somebody who is missing, who the cops have decided lives a quote unquote high risk lifestyle, they are not bothered. They can't be bothered to put in the effort to try to find them. And in my opinion, a lot of those people need more, like we should be worried about those people more. They're already at an increased risk. And it's just so dismissive of somebody's humanity.
It's never quantified in any way.
Right. And the
what
way that
constitutes a high risk lifestyle? Where's the threshold?
Well, okay, let's talk about this because when her aunt and her uncle kind of became like the spokespeople for the family, and they were kind of the ones doing the conversations with law enforcement. And so when her aunt called and this is let me back up a little bit, because when her aunt and uncle realized that she was missing, they waited like a week before they really did anything or contacted anybody. And there's some weird shenanigans going on. They weren't notified. So Aubrey was living with her mom and her brother at the time, who I mentioned before also had their own issues with substance abuse. But the mother or the brother, they didn't notify anybody else in the family that Aubrey had gone missing. So they didn't find out for quite some time. And then once they found out, they waited a little bit. And this is one of the interviews that I listened to with the uncle. This is one of the things that he said that he regrets, that he wishes he wouldn't have waited. And also, if you go to the cops, if somebody's missing and you go to the cops and they tell you that you have to wait, no, you don't. You do not have to wait. I know that there used to be the whole 48 hours and all that stuff. Like that was something you would see in the movies and on TV. That's not a real thing. You do not have to wait any length of time whatsoever to report somebody missing. They will try to convince you of that and make you wait. You do not. And you just have to keep pestering them and just refuse to leave. Say, I'm not leaving here until you file a missing persons report, because they will do their very best to avoid putting the work in, which is sad, but that's reality. So that's something I definitely wanted to make sure that was, clear. You do not have to wait. But also, when Aubrey's aunt went to the police department, the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, and requested that they look into this, the sheriff literally told her that, we can't because, or we're not going to because of her high risk lifestyle. And her aunt was like, excuse me, what do you mean? Because she's transgender? And he's like, no, I'm not saying that. Because she's indigenous? No, I'm not saying that. Well, then what do you mean? Does that mean that my niece isn't worth looking for? No, that's not what I'm saying. And she's like, yes, that is exactly what you're saying. And essentially what it boiled down to was that she was a known user of drugs. And I'm not kidding. This is a thing that they said, or at least according to her aunt, this is a thing that they told her. She had 500 male friends on Facebook.
Wow.
So that qualifies her as a high risk lifestyle, and it's not worth, he said that we don't have the resources to put into looking for her because she had 500 male friends on Facebook and she's a known user of drugs.
Yeah, just a complete blow off,
Yes. Yes.
which is not surprising given the location, given that this was northwestern Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Uh, quite
Very rural.
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 Yeah,
I hate that
and
word.
among those communities, racism and other forms of, let's just be honest, hatred or
Yes.
disgust uh,
Bigotry.
are still quite prevalent.
Yeah.
And um, that's not to say that all of those areas are as backward as this area, but it's still a big problem in not just the US, but many parts of the world.
Yes. And I mean, that's what brings us to the whole epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. This it's a racist thing.
Hmm.
Cops don't care. They're seen as disposable. And that's what enables this to continue is there. It's a huge, if bad people, serial killers, rapists, whatever, if they know that there's a demographic of people that nobody cares, doesn't matter whatsoever, then of course they're going to target that demographic of people. It makes it so much easier for them to get away with it. So I mean, it is just really painting a giant target on the backs of Indigenous women and Two Spirits. Which just so everybody knows, Two Spirits is, I think, a beautiful term. I love that so much. In the Indigenous communities, it just refers to transgenderism. And that's Aubrey very much identified in that way as a Two Spirit. So yeah, it is just really sad. And it's just so prevalent. It makes me, I mean, it's the year 2022. I mean, this was 2019, but it's the year 2022, and we're still dealing with that level of hatred and ignorance.
Yeah, and the subtext of this sheriff's response is she deserved what she got, whatever
Yes.
happened to her.
Yeah,
And
and that's
that's so often the subtext of these cases, is that these women deserve whatever happened to them because of their high risk lifestyles, which is really just a way of saying that them being trans or them being just indigenous women are is enough to for us to wipe our hands of them. We don't care. They are lesser. Um, and whatever trouble they got into, they got themselves into it and they deserve the consequences of that. That's really the attitude we're talking about here.
yes.
It's not about resource allocation or whatever other petty excuses are given. It really comes back to a racist mentality and an othering
Mm.
mentality.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's just that I mean, can you imagine dismissing a life because they happen to use drugs? That's mind-boggling to me. And it's not, I don't think it's really about resources, because if it's some white woman syndrome, if it's some pretty little white girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, suddenly the resources are available. So I think that, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to push back and say, oh, institutional racism doesn't exist. Yes, it does. And I mean, I don't know if anything can make it more clear than the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. You don't see that problem in the white population. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just not a thing that exists. So yeah, the fact that they were able to just completely dismiss this young woman, sorry, young woman. I mean, I see her as a baby. She's a baby. I mean, she was what, 25?
Yeah, 25.
25? Okay. So yeah, she's a baby. I mean, just really, and she was really in kind of you know, uh a process of figuring herself out, as we all are at 25. Just trying to figure out who we are, figure out what we stand for and where we're going and what we want to do. And she deserves better. Her family deserves better than this. And the fact that this sheriff is able to just be like, sorry, she's lives a high risk lifestyle, we don't have the resources, is absurd. It makes me angry. I'm sorry, guys. This shit really does make me angry. I've hated the high risk lifestyle thing. This is like an ongoing, you will find this across so many cases in the true crime world. If there's ever a situation where it's an Indigenous woman, or if it's a transgender or gay, or if it's a drug user, it's very easy for cops to dismiss these people as if they aren't worthy of resources.
And so many cops are all too happy to whine about how dangerous their jobs are. And in some cases, they're correct. But the hypocrisy there is that they too are living high risk lifestyles, just in a different way. So that whole terminology really means nothing. Again,
That's such a great point.
it's just a petty excuse to not do anything because you don't feel like this person's life is worth anything.
And that's really what it boils down to, is that they see these lives of unworthy of the effort. And
Yeah. That's going to be a theme, I suppose.
Yes.
That's going to run through
all
of these cases that we cover.
We're going to sound like broken records because every single time we cover one of these cases, I'm almost willing to guarantee you that there will be some kind of just absolute scumfuckery on the part of the cops.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just the way that it is in these situations. When you're covering marginalized groups in these cases, the cops don't care. They do not care. They just don't. And that's really across the board. And it's very rare to find a situation where that's not the case. If you guys know of a situation where it's a marginalized, missing and murdered Indigenous woman, a Black woman who went missing, and the cops actually did their job, I would love for you to send that to me. I would love it, because that would be a unicorn.
The closest I can think of is the case of the Green River serial killer near Seattle. And the lead detective on that case, Dave something, I'm forgetting his last name. At least from the story he's told, and I read his book that he wrote about being the lead detective on this case. He wasn't of that ilk of police investigators. He was very aware that the victims were prostitutes who they were finding, and he was utterly haunted by every one of their cases. And I think it really shows, though, when he gives interviews, because he remembers all of their names, he remembers all of their faces. Dave Reichert is his last name. He wrote a book called Chasing the Devil, I believe it is, and it's his sort of autobiography of working on the Green River serial killer case, who turned out to be Gary Ridgway, of course, but
who is fascinating.
Yeah,
fascinating.
But that's about as close to one of those examples as I can think of, and probably the only one I can think of.
I'm sure that there are instances where this is not the case. I have no doubt that there's some unicorns out there where cops actually are compassionate and do their jobs regardless of the socioeconomic status or whatever of the person that they're looking for, or murder they're trying to solve, or whatever. But it's incredibly rare. I mean, this is a really serious and ongoing and prevalent problem in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Which is why we're doing this series. I mean, really, this is why we're doing this series, because it is, and it's also, I mean, I don't mean to trash the true crime community at all. I love the true crime community, you guys. I'm a junkie. I love this stuff. But it is, and it's gotten a little bit better. There are some true crime YouTubers and stuff who have made like a very obvious effort to include more MMIW cases or whatever. But they don't. That's why we're doing this. They don't get enough coverage. They don't get enough attention. And that's, I mean, a huge part of how you solve these cases is by getting information out there. Hopefully, somebody, the right eyes will see it or whatever, and they'll come forward with some information that will help break open the case. That's a huge part of, how these things get broken open. So it's just really frustrating that there's just this obvious bias in
and
law enforcement.
I don't know how the response of the Cherokee Marshals has been compared to that of the Delaware County sheriffs, but often tribal police are just as uncaring and corrupt as
ACAB, baby.
non-tribal police, I suppose you could term them, or standard police forces. And if anybody wants to dig into a history of that, that's somewhat related to MMIW, because there are women in this circumstance I'm about to just briefly mention who were murdered, and their murderers have yet to be identified. But if you look at what happened on the Pine Ridge Reservation in the 1970s, which of course was where the shootout was between American Indian Movement members and FBI agents, which resulted in one of the FBI agents being killed, and
Leonard Peltier being thrown in prison.
Right, the extradition of Leonard Peltier from Canada to the U.S., and he's been in prison ever since. In the events leading up to that end, so to speak, of when the FBI agents were killed and Peltier was imprisoned, there was a woman, an Indigenous woman named Anna Mae Aquash, who was found murdered, shot in the head, I believe, on the side of a road on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I believe it was the police force that was responsible for investigating through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, which is a notoriously corrupt and arguably just as racist police institution as non-tribal police. They gave her murder very short shrift, and to this day it remains unsolved. So there are many other examples of BIA police and tribal police just completely and on purpose missing the mark. But
yes, well, and we should also mention too, and we should maybe do like a deep dive into how this all works too, just so that people have an idea. There's a lot of jurisdictional issues over these cases, because if they happen on a reservation, then it's under one jurisdiction. But it is a mess. We've talked to, was it Liza that we talked to about this, or was it Anita? I don't remember. We've done a couple different MMI.
Liza.
Okay, so there's we've done a couple different MMIW episodes, which you should check out if you haven't already. But it is a mess. The jurisdictional issues over who is responsible for investigating which crimes when is very convoluted, and it doesn't do anybody any favors, because it just really it's confusing, and nobody really knows who's in charge. Nobody really knows who's supposed to be, and it's mind-boggling that it's so complicated.
I think it's intentional.
Yes.
I think it's a direct ancestor of the colonial approach to eradicating Indigenous peoples. And
yes,
once the U.S. colonial government got to the point where it realized that it wasn't going to be able to wholesale eradicate Indigenous peoples, at least not all at once, and that it had to, in a term, work with them, it set up jurisdictional processes and guidelines and boundaries that would make it as hard as possible for these people to seek justice for crimes that were committed against them. I don't see any other way to explain it.
Well, I think we mentioned that last time, that this is the colonialism never ended.
Right.
It is ongoing to this day. And so I think you're right. I think that this is all very intentional. And I think, the genocide of Indigenous, I guess, because it's Canada and it's really all over the world. It's Canada, it's the US, it's New Zealand and Australia. This is a global issue. But I mean, specifically to North America, I think that this is very much part and parcel of that operation of the genocide of Indigenous Americans, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
and there are so many people who will say, "Well, that's history and we have to move
mm-mm,
on." It's not history, it's still happening.
it's
This
happening.
this case being one of far too many examples.
Yes, it is definitely still happening right now every single day. Um, so yeah. But to get back to Shorty, as she liked to be called. In the early morning hours of March 9th, about 3:30 in the morning, according to her mother and brother, uh, for whatever reason, I guess maybe let's back up a tiny bit because in the weeks leading up to Aubrey's disappearance, her family said that she had started to get a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of closed off. Like she was, as I said, she was all about her family. She was very in contact with everybody, you know, through DMs and phone calls and all of that stuff. She was very involved in her family's lives. But in the weeks leading up, she was starting to act a little distant. I don't know what relevance, if any, that has to her case, but I do feel like it's important to mention that I mean, her family said that was it possible that perhaps she had relapsed? Was she
Mhm.
using again? I mean, that's definitely something that we need to be cognizant of, that is a possibility. And it does lead into some of the theories as to what might have happened to her. So I do want to make sure that we get that out there, that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was acting a little off. Nothing super serious, but just a little distant, maybe a little moody, that kind of stuff, which at 25, totally normal anyway. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, but I do just want to make sure I get it out there. I'm trying to give you guys as much information as I can, or as we can, you know, because that's the best way to, you know, kind of try to help here. So,
And those that sort of behavior always becomes more amplified in
mhm,
hindsight when somebody goes missing or something worse happens to them. That's when, in hindsight, in those cases, that's when you really see it and
yes,
think, "Oh, for that week or two,
she was a little
Shorty
weird. Like
Shorty
she
was
was acting,
acting." Yeah,
yeah,
but if nothing had happened to her,
it
it
would have
would've
been,
probably would have come and gone. Yeah,
yeah.
so
Because
it's
it's normal. I mean, for every human being on earth, we have our downtimes. We have our times where we're just off. We just don't feel ourselves. We don't feel great. We're just kind of in a funk. And that's normal for every human being on planet Earth. I mean, could it have been more with her? Could it have been that she relapsed, that she was using again? Could it have been? It could have been, sure, but I mean, I just think that, like Jesse said, had she not gone missing, it might have just been like a little hiccup in the road that maybe people would have been like, "Man, she's a little weird. Like, I hope she's okay or whatever." And then, but it would have just moved right along, you know. We should also mention before I get too far into the circumstances of her disappearance that she did have a boyfriend from New Mexico who was an asshole. So she had left Oklahoma at one point and moved to New Mexico, which apparently is like a very common thing. In that podcast I was telling you about, broken. Um, I guess that's like a very common thing for the indigenous population of Oklahoma to spend some time, like leave and go off and spend some time in New Mexico for a while. But she did that herself with a boyfriend who she had told her family members, hold on, I have a kid. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on.
I'll just add about New Mexico that, last summer, I interviewed, 2 professors, one of whom is based in New Mexico, David Correa. The other is Tyler Wall. They wrote a book called Police, Field Guide, I believe, and they recently wrote, another book together. Uh, the name is escaping me. It might be a violent history, but I'll have to get back to you on that one. But David Correa, who teaches in New Mexico, he indicated in that interview that New Mexico, specifically Albuquerque, has a
Mm,
horrendous policing problem,
yes.
and
Yes.
it involves all sorts of uh, criminal behavior from violence to
It's so
corruption.
bad.
Yeah.
We should do like a whole ass show on that because it is so bad. Aya asked in the chat if she suffered from depression. I she was never diagnosed, I don't believe. So her family has said that she didn't have any diagnosed mental health issues. It's possible that she had been diagnosed and never told anybody about it. Unfortunately, with depression, there's some stigma and stuff. So maybe it's something she didn't want to talk about. When we get into it, though, she was on medication that she absolutely did need, but we'll get into that later. But as far as I know, I mean, we all kind of, I think, have issues here and there with maybe not depression, but, just feeling down or whatever, like I mentioned earlier. But to my knowledge, according to her family, she didn't have any diagnosed mental health issues. So
Was
that's the best.
do you know if she was undergoing any hormone treatment?
Yes, that's the medication that I was going to mention. So she was on is it called HRT, hormone replacement therapy?
Mhm.
So she was on HRT, but she was also epileptic. So she was on anti-seizure medication, and she left without both of those,
Mm.
which is why I'm more inclined to say was than is, because even if she left of her own free will, the fact that she didn't take her purse or her medications means that she was in trouble.
Right, and also seems to indicate that she was planning on coming back.
Right back. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into that. So early morning hours of March 9th, around 3:30 in the morning, like I started to say earlier. She apparently had been messaging with some people on Facebook trying to get somebody to come pick her up. Nobody was really answering her. But at 3:30 in the morning, her brother was sleeping in the living room on the couch. Her mother had apparently woken up to go to the bathroom, according to her. And Aubrey came out and said she was leaving and she would be back. So she walked out of the house wearing all black, girl after my own heart. Black boots, black like fishnet tights, a black skirt, black shirt, black jacket. So she was all in black. Walked out of the house around 3:30, never to be seen again. So at about 3:42, her cell phone pinged off of a very nearby. It's like, not even a mile from her house, like a mobile home park, trailer park. I don't know, trailer park. Is that still okay to say? But then that's it. That is the last anything that we have of Aubrey. So there was the cell phone ping at 3:42 a.m. and that's it. She just disappears off the face of the planet. So again, she left without her purse, which had her medications in it, her HRT and her anti-seizure medication. So it does seem like whatever she was leaving to do, she meant to be right back. But we don't know. We don't know if she did get somebody to come pick her up. We don't know if she lived in like a rural, I hate this word, rural area. So it's not like she was going to be walking anywhere. Like there's the trailer park near her home, but it's like kind of that's it. I mean, you really kind of need a ride. So I don't know where she was going or why at 3:30 in the morning. Nobody knows her, at
Yeah.
least that they've said.
Well, this is just speculation on my part and going off of the fact that she did have her troubles with substance abuse. And as someone who certainly had my troubles with substance abuse in the past, I know that if you're in a spell of relapse or you're just jonesing for whatever your fix might be, that you're willing to go out at just about any
Any
time of
hour,
day or
yeah.
night to go get something, and you're willing to just throw all precaution to the wind with regard to whether you need medications or treatment or not to bring with you. Um, so I'm just speculating, but it could have been a thing where maybe she was experiencing a relapse and she was going to pick up whatever she may have been using, and that's why she didn't bring her purse. Maybe she had cash on her and intended to come back. Maybe it was in or near that trailer park that she was intending to pick up, and something went wrong during that exchange. I don't know, but it's obviously a possibility.
Yes, that's certainly one of the theories, that she had left the house in order to go and score some kind of drugs. I don't know what her drug of choice was, but that's definitely one of the theories that's out there. And then, something in the exchange went terribly wrong. And things happened. But that's really that's what's so frustrating about this case, is that there's there's no evidence. There's nothing. It's like she just poof into thin air. And so these are some of the most difficult cases to investigate, because there's no, where do you start? Where do you even start? I mean, obviously you start with those closest to her, and I don't mean to imply that, maybe her family was involved or anything, but the fact that, the cops didn't do any investigation. They didn't really interview family members, or, I mean, it took a long time for them to do anything at all. And mostly it was just them, making every excuse to not do anything. So that's it. I mean, March 9th, 3:30 in the morning, she leaves her house. That's the last time she's seen. Her cell phone pings at 3:42 a.m. And then from there on out, we have nothing. No evidence of her. Nobody. And in fact, nobody from the mobile. I mean, granted, it's 3:42 in the morning. I don't think a lot of people are going to be awake, but nobody saw her, or at least admits to having seen her in the trailer park that morning. Is that the right word? I feel like I'm going to get in trouble. Is it trailer park? Mobile home park? I don't know.
I
Trailer
think
park.
trailer park is fine.
All right. I don't know.
Yeah.
People are looking for reasons to get mad, so I'm always nervous.
If that nomenclature has changed at all to be
I don't know.
more politically correct, I
Yeah.
doubt it's been because of a campaign by people who live in trailer parks. I don't
Yeah.
think they really care what
No.
it's called. As
So
long as it's
again,
not called a shithole or something like that.
which I think some of them would probably be open about that too,
Yeah. Houses are shitholes too sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so again, cops did nothing. I think it took a few days for her aunt and uncle to even be made aware that she was missing. And then they unfortunately did wait some time before they decided to make the missing persons report. And then the cops obviously did everything possible to avoid actually putting any effort into finding Aubrey.
So just to ask you something about that point of their waiting to file a report, did they give specifics as to why they waited?
I think that I think for a lot of people in this situation, so they don't live nearby. And so I think it's easy to just, maybe she's just off with friends, or
Yeah.
maybe she's, what I mean? You don't want to think the worst. And so I think that there's like a kind of an instinctual thing to just try to minimize it. And, she'll show up, she'll turn up, whatever. And I think that, having realized that she did have some issues, that maybe she was, having some struggles. I know that she had told her aunt that she was trying to do her best to not be influenced by her mother and her brother, who again were both also drug users. But when you're living in the same house, that's really difficult. So maybe did she go to stay with friends? And I don't know for sure if they were made aware of the fact that she had left her purse and her medications.
Mhm.
So that maybe they may have just thought that she needed to like get elsewhere.
Yeah.
I don't really know for sure though. I don't think that they really address that in the interviews that I've listened to with them. But I think that for a lot of people, I think you don't want to think worst case scenario.
Right.
So you're willing to.
She was 25 as well, which
Right.
is
She's an adult.
right?
Yeah.
And
she had just
they
left this boyfriend. Maybe she went back to the boyfriend because she had talked with her aunt.
right.
Apparently her boyfriend helped get her boobs done.
Mhm.
And she felt a sort of not loyalty, but she felt like as if she owed him something. And he was trying to convince her to come back. So maybe her aunt thought that she made the mistake of going back to this asshole.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of things that it could have potentially weighed in their heads.
And he was physically abusive toward her.
Physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally,
Yeah.
you name it. He was a jerk.
Mm.
Which is another really unfortunate and common problem in the Indigenous community, is domestic violence, all that stuff. So, yeah, he was really pretty, at least I don't know, but that is what Aubrey told her aunt, that he was really awful.
And that brings up a good point that we should touch on quickly, is that in a lot of Indigenous communities, alcoholism and substance abuse are huge problems,
Really
very
big
prevalent
problems.
problems. And
Hmm.
again, just going back to the Pine Ridge Reservation really quick, which is in South Dakota. I'm sure, yeah, South Dakota. I always get the Dakotas confused, but it is South Dakota. That is one of the uh, poorest areas, if not the poorest, in the what's considered the United States. And the population there has huge problems with alcoholism, especially. And if you look at the life expectancy of residents of the Pine Ridge Reservation, it's abysmal. I forget the exact numbers, but compared to what the average life expectancy is
Yeah, it's
for,
bad.
yeah, it's
It's really
unbelievable.
bad.
So yeah, it's not something what her problems may have been with substance abuse. It's not something unique to her particular indigenous community or
No.
background.
Unfortunately, a really common problem.
Yeah.
Aya asked if authorities have questioned the boyfriend. That's a great question. Her family, the cops have been less than forthcoming about their process and what, if anything, they've done or who, if anyone, they've spoken to. I do know that the family tried their best to do their own sort of investigation, which means examining his social media content to see where he was. And apparently, 2 days before Aubrey went missing, he was in New Mexico, but I guess that from where he lived to where they lived is like maybe a 10-12 hour drive. So certainly something that's doable. But he has since moved from New Mexico. I believe he's living in Maine. But that's a very good question. I don't know that they have ever spoken to him or done anything really. I mean, I don't know that they've done anything. The family has really kind of had to go at this on their own. They've had to organize their own search parties and all of that stuff.
Right.
So
And again, a family that has very limited financial
very limited
resources.
resources. Yes. Unfortunately, they do have a great community around them, and they have gotten some help from like some national MMIW organizations, but really limited resources. They do have I don't have it, I just found it. They do have like a fundraising link. So once we wrap, I'll make sure that that gets put in the description, the show notes or whatever, so that you guys, if you are able to contribute, you can contribute. That money goes towards organizing search parties, providing food and water for volunteers, hanging up flyers, getting flyers printed, all of that good stuff. So yeah, they really are kind of on their own here. And that, again, that will also be a very common through line through all of these cases. These families are very much left on their own to conduct their own investigations. Like, I mean, listen, I feel like I could probably do a pretty good investigation because I'm a true crime nerd. But most of these people, they have no idea what they're doing. And
Right.
they're left on their own with no help, no assistance, no guidance, no nothing, to try to find their family member. And it's horrific. And there
Right.
have been circumstances where a family member has found their own loved one dead,
Yeah.
and no family should have to go through that.
No.
Period.
No.
It's
And
ugh.
it becomes a full-time or even more than full-time undertaking to
Yes.
carry out this type of work. And it can't help but being so if you're, especially because you're trying to find a missing loved one, you're going to put everything you can into that. But then if you have to try to balance that with maintaining an income, you're you're going almost more than 24/7 if that were possible. Um, so and that takes a tremendous health toll on the people involved with regard to
Yes.
stress, both mentally and physically. And we're talking about communities that are already under severe amounts of physical and mental and emotional stress for a lot of other reasons.
Financial stress. I
Hmm.
mean, the system has been grinding these people down for decades.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of generational trauma. There's a lot, you know what I mean? It's really just like it's a perfect storm of awfulness,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, boyfriend moves. He's now in Maine, I guess. But there really is no other information. There's no other, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, the law enforcement is doing nothing. They aren't really investigating anything. They aren't making any efforts. There was a sock found with blood on it nearby her house, also a black jacket, which is something she was wearing. Any DNA tests that have been conducted on those items have come back inconclusive. So there's really nothing for anybody to go on whatsoever. And the family is now left in limbo, just trying to figure out ways. I mean, also finding ways to keep her name out there, to keep her face out there. That's a really huge thing. Getting public attention is massive. I mean, it really is just monumentally massive, because it can really spark somebody's memory, or it can if somebody has knowledge of something that went down and maybe they have been silent in the past because they had a relationship with somebody or whatever, those things change. Allegiances change, loyalties change. People can have, a stroke of conscience. Lots of things can happen. But just trying to keep like the information in the public is really difficult. I mean, if you go look right now and try to find news broadcasts about Aubrey, it's very, very little. Slim to none. I mean, I was able to find like a few instances where she was mentioned on local news and stuff, but I mean, very little media attention has been paid to Aubrey's case.
Yeah, so it's People Magazine, but credit where credit's due
Yes.
for highlighting her case, even the little bit that they did in an issue. I think it was from late last year.
Yeah, I think so. They did like a series on missing and murdered Indigenous women, which, listen, I appreciate the fact that they it's from November 3rd, 2021, which I guess we could pull that up. It's not very long.
So just before you do, on this missing flyer that's here, it has numbers to call. There's the Delaware County Sheriff.
Those are also in the show notes. I put them in the show notes.
So my question about that is, if they have this number out here for people to call, do they have an open case, or is it just like, hey, if you have information, call us and maybe we'll do something about it?
I do believe her case is still considered open.
Okay.
I am not positive on that. Again, I would certainly call the Cherokee Marshals before I would call the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, because I don't know. I mean, like you said earlier, both are, I mean, it's difficult to say which one would be better.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can try. If you have information, certainly you should try. Unfortunately, if you call and give them information, there's a very good chance that that's going to get written down and like shoved in a drawer somewhere and nobody's going to pay attention. So you may have to call a couple different times and ask if there's been any developments or movements on the information that you've provided, because it's so frustrating, but it's very likely that even if they got information, that they wouldn't bother with it.
Yeah. And it's worth bringing up too, and again, this is just speculation, but oftentimes police themselves are involved in these crimes or disappearances. So that could be something that we're looking at here.
And that's another huge problem that happens within Indigenous communities, is a multitude of women are raped by cops, and nothing is ever done. And so that's something that maybe we should cover on an episode of the show. Maybe just like a general, maybe not any one specific case, but like the general like epidemic of that happening, because it's a huge problem. So yes, there's a very good chance that that there's a cop involved in some way, and that there's a cover up happening. Not saying that that's the case here, but it is certainly a possibility, no question.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that she had any known interactions with the police before. I'm not personally aware of that. But it could be something where she had already had interactions with the cops before, and then that led to, some kind of really bad interaction.
Again, just speculation here, but if she did have some sort of relationship with a police officer or police officers, not necessarily a relationship, but say these police officers
were aware of her,
and they had access to confiscated drugs, right? And they were selling these drugs on the side, which is not an uncommon thing for
Happens
police
all the time.
officers to do. Perhaps there was some sort of regular interaction between Shorty and a police officer or police officers who were doing this, and it got to a situation where they were going to be compromised in some way, or something went wrong, and
She saw something she shouldn't have. She knew
right,
too much. Yeah.
right, or they just decided to I don't like this term, but have their way with her, if you will, and
Yeah.
that ended up in a horrendous.
She fought back.
Yeah,
Shit
that ended up
happened.
horrendously.
Yeah.
But again, just speculation. But because the police aren't doing anything, that's all we have at our disposal is to speculate, and these are all plausible speculations and possibilities that we have to put out there.
Yes. And that's, again, going to be a common theme in a lot of these cases, that we don't have a lot of information because there's been no investigation. And if there is an investigation, there's very little communication about what's been discovered. And so it is going, I mean, that's why I mentioned this last time we did one of these, is I chose a case that was one of the more well-known cases. And the only reason it's well-known is because there was audio included, which true crime podcasters and stuff love, because that's hard evidence that we can all listen to and share and all of that stuff. And so that's kind of appealing to the audiences. And so that's what get clicks. Not to say that she doesn't deserve, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? There's a reason why certain cases are covered more in true crime than others. But a lot of these cases, it's going to be difficult for us to find really good information. So there is going to be a lot of speculation on our part. And that's really, it's just what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not saying that we know. We're not saying that this is what happened. We're just saying that these are plausible situations that could have happened, that we're just discussing, just kind of getting it out there to kind of brainstorm and try to figure out what could have happened.
Yeah. And hopefully that gets viewers and listeners thinking as well. And if they are inclined to look into these cases themselves, there are those possibilities for them to look into and pursue. And I think in a case like this, if you're trying to figure out exactly what happened or get as close as you can, you have to have all of those possibilities charted out and pursue each one. And in that context, the white police, so to speak, are certainly not going to put in that time and effort. They have the resources, there's no doubt about that, but they just don't care.
Yeah. I mean, in most cities, 50% of the city budget is spent on cops, and then they're going to try to tell us they don't have resources.
Yeah.
That's silly. Okay, so let's pull up the People magazine article. We can just go through it really briefly. Hello.
Were there any reported sightings of her?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so no resting until we get answers. Transgender Indigenous woman Aubrey Dameron vanished in 2019. Aubrey was 25 when she went missing from her home in Northeast Oklahoma. So here's editor's note. So this is they're just talking about the fact that they chose to feature the cases of 6 Indigenous women. I'm going to read these statistics for you, though, because they are staggering. Of the 89,637 active missing persons cases in the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, approximately 1,500 are American Indian and Alaska Native people. But the count could be far higher based on tracking by the Sovereign Bodies Institute, who Anita Lucchese, who we interviewed, she was from Sovereign Bodies. Great group. You should definitely go and check out their work that they're doing there. It's it's sad that it's necessary for that kind of a group to exist, but they are doing phenomenal work on this issue. So Aubrey Dameron,
an actual NGO doing actual
work, yes, it's great. It's amazing. It's a unicorn. So Aubrey Dameron was known for rooting for the underdog in her small town of Grove, Oklahoma. When she saw someone who didn't fit, she would always be the first person to reach out. Quote, if she saw someone who looked like they were maybe an outcast, she would be the person to welcome them in and really sit down and get to know them, end quote, says Dameron's uncle, Christian Fencer. Quote, that's just who she was. Yeah, they do say was. She just wanted to She just wanted to make sure that everyone felt like they had a place in the world, kind of like a mother hen making sure that everyone was good and doing well, end quote. Even though she was treated unkindly in high school as a transitioning transgender woman, she never let it get to her. Quote, I would find out that people had been mean, and her reply every time was, it's okay, Aunt Pam, I'll just keep praying for them, end quote. Her Aunt Pam Smith tells people in this week's issue, quote, I'll never forget, pop-ups. I'll never forget the way she greeted people, end quote. Smith recalls, quote, the hug and the kiss on the cheek and how are you? I love you. She wanted to be accepted. She wanted to be loved, and she was full of love, end quote. There she is. Beautiful girl. A member of the Cherokee Nation, Dameron, who went by the nickname Shorty, dreamed of becoming a singer or actress. Quote, she would sing your ear off, end quote, says Spencer. Quote, there was this coffee table in the middle of the living room that's very sturdy. She would stand on, dance on, or lay on, and just kind of go all out and give us a full performance. That's just who she was, end quote. She wanted to take acting classes, but he says, but, quote, unfortunately, we were in poverty, so she couldn't afford to take those classes, but she always wanted to dance and perform and sing for people, end quote. Dameron was 25 when she went missing from her home around 3 a.m. on March 9th, 2019. Her mother said she last saw her daughter wearing a leather jacket and walking away from the home. Authorities said her cell phone pinged the Wi-Fi at a nearby mobile home park. Okay, mobile home park. But no one reported seeing her. Smith suspects foul play. Quote, she just wouldn't stop all communication with family, end quote. She says, quote, she just wouldn't go and disappear, end quote. Quote, I wish she was somewhere living her best life, but it's not Aubrey, end quote, says Spencer. Quote, anyone who knew Aubrey knew that she couldn't not speak to her family for a long period of time, end quote. Since she went missing, Smith and Spencer have conducted searches and even created a Facebook page dedicated to her case. That's in the description if you guys want to go check that out. Since she went missing, Smith and Spencer have conducted searches and I already read that. Sorry. Quote, we share her face constantly to Facebook, letting people know where that she is still missing, end quote, says Spencer. Quote, there's no resting until we get answers. Quote, I have hope that we are going to get answers, says Smith. And I understand that it might not be the answers we want, but we just want to bring her home. We never imagined 2 years ago that we would be looking for a relative. You don't ever think it's going to be you. And then all of a sudden you just wake up and you're in this nightmare, end quote. Anyone with information about Dameron's disappearance is asked to contact the FBI, 1-800-CALL-FBI or tips.fbi.gov or the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service at 918-207-3800. So that's a very vague, sparse article. I mean, again, kudos to people for doing it, I guess. It feels very bare bones, but at least they covered it, I guess.
Yeah. It's a small piece of information, but the more information that's out there, the better.
Yes. And People Magazine has a fairly decent readership, I guess. So I mean, take what you can get, I guess, but we should be pushing for more. It's unacceptable that cases like this don't get any coverage. I also put a link to article from Cherokee Phoenix that I found in the description box. It's a little bit more fleshy. It fleshes it out quite a bit more, talks a little bit about some more specifics about who she was, that kind of stuff. We'll pull this up because there is information about the DNA or the sock and stuff that I mentioned. Here we go. Okay, so this is part of a much longer article, but this is just I want to get this kind of fleshed out for you guys. So the search begins. The first search for Dameron was around her home on March 23rd. March 23rd, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Oh, painful. 2 weeks after she was reported missing, Smith said, quote, there's too many red flags, family that should have been there helping search, end quote, said Smith. Again, the family thing, I don't mean to imply that it's a family member, but it's often a family member. And it's just weird that they didn't tell anybody she was missing. Seriously, I'm not accusing anybody. I'm really not. And I would never want to accuse a family member without any proof. And I don't have any. I'm just saying it's a little weird to me. So during the search, Smith said, quote, a sock with possible blood on it, end quote, was found, but DNA results were, quote, inconclusive, end quote. Smith said that nearly 3 months later, during Memorial Day weekend, a tip led them to a shallow grave next to a black leather jacket near Kenwood. Smith said a search party consisting of a team of Oklahoma City and K-9 teams with members from Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas conducted a week-long search. Quote, while we were out searching in this area, appeared to be a shallow grave and black leather jacket laying next to it, end quote, said Smith. Smith said what was discovered came back as, quote, inconclusive when compared to Dameron's DNA sample. Quote, my thought is our own family didn't even, this is what I'm talking about, okay? So it's not just me. Quote, my thought is our own family didn't even contact us and let us know that she was missing. So how do you trust them to give actual DNA of Aubrey's? They could have given them anybody's DNA, end quote, said Smith. So her aunt is even also suspicious. So it's not just me. Please don't come for me.
What was found in the shallow grave that was inconclusive?
I don't think anything. I think they're talking about the DNA that was attempted to be taken from the jacket.
Okay.
They said was inconclusive, but
and there's no information out there about what was in the supposedly shallow grave.
Not that I was able to find, no. So the Cherokee Phoenix attempted to contact Dameron's mother and brother for this report, but as of publication, had not had any response from them. I hate being suspicious of family, but that's weird to me that they didn't tell anybody she was missing. They didn't, that's weird to me.
Yeah, especially when you pair that up with what the family says in the People piece, like, we knew something was wrong immediately when she didn't communicate with us after a certain amount of hours, but then there's this whole waiting period before you file a report. It is questionable at the very least.
And again, I dislike immensely when people immediately, if a wife goes missing, oh, it was obviously the husband. And oftentimes it is, but not always. And I don't like the jump to conclusion thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't like when people immediately that's very tunnel vision. And I think that's not helpful. We should be open-minded and examine the actual evidence, but that's what I'm doing here. This is all very weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
That there was such a lapse in time and that nobody was communicating the fact that she was missing and that nobody, you know what I mean? That's just all very, very strange. And that goes to theories. Did she overdose? And her family freaked out because they too were using. And so did they just hide her body? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you have to examine every possibility. So soon after the week-long search, Smith said that communication with the DCSO nearly ceased. Quote, we would receive tips and we would pass them along and just see their disregard for her life, end quote, which just makes me angry. Okay, so here we go. McGirt versus Oklahoma ruling. While Dameron's case is still being investigated, Smith said she could not speak on where it stands. According to the DCSO, which again is Delaware County Sheriff's Office, just to be clear, because of the 2020 U.S. Supreme Court's McGirt versus Oklahoma ruling, the office is no longer handling Dameron's case, and it has been, quote, assumed by the FBI, end quote. In 2020, the Supreme Court's McGirt ruling affirmed that Muscogee Creek Nation's jurisdiction over criminal cases within its historical reservation. The ruling paved the way for the CN's Cherokee Nation's reservation status and authority over certain criminal cases within its reservation, affecting cases such as Dameron's. And this, again, the confusing aspect of jurisdiction. So this case is just getting passed around to different agencies, and nobody's really doing anything about it.
Yeah, and how much memory is tainted, or how much it fades in that time.
And potential evidence that has been lost because nobody was looking for it, or, there's so much. There's so much. So again, this article, we can't even get like a legitimate height. I've seen 5'10", I've seen 6 foot. This one says 5'9" and 130 pounds. She is a transitioning transgender Native American with brown eyes, brown hair, a triquetra?
I would say triquetra.
Yeah. Okay. Symbol tattoo. The symbol that was on the flyer, the one in the middle, that's on her back. And another tattoo reading Shorty on her upper left arm. She has entered into the National Crime Information Center and the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Again, anybody with information can call OSBI. And then there's also the Facebook page, which link is in the description box for that. Okay. So before we wrap, I do want to speak on something that is also going to piss you off. So her family, after she went missing, worked with a local politician to write legislation that would very much work like an Amber Alert. The idea was to call it the Aubrey Alert. So they introduced the Aubrey Alert Act, which would essentially just notify across agencies, across jurisdictions, when an Indigenous person went missing, so that there was a reduced amount of this not knowing, because it's in, a different jurisdiction or whatever, it would go across and it would be throughout the state of Oklahoma. Great idea, right? Republicans, conservatives didn't like the idea that the act was named after a transgender person. And so it has now been forced to be renamed. And I don't even know what to say about that other than, so they renamed it the Casey Alert Act.
Where does that come from?
So here, let me pull this article up. So many buttons to click. Here we go. Okay, so this is from, again, Cherokee Phoenix. This is a website that has a lot of great stories from Indigenous communities in Oklahoma City. So it has a new name, but a bill originally calling for the creation of, quote, Aubrey Alerts, end quote, has received a recommendation of passage from its assigned committee in the Oklahoma legislature. This was written on March 12th, 2021, so almost a year ago. House Bill 1790 is now the Casey Alert measure, named for Cherokee Nation citizen Casey Russell, a former, I don't know how to say that, I don't know.
I would say Tahlequah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Resident who went missing in July 2016. He was last seen in McAllister. The bill, authored by Representative Daniel Pay, who is from Lawton, was assigned to the House Public Safety Committee on February 2nd. It called for Aubrey alerts for people who go missing but are neither children nor elderly. It referred to Cherokee Nation citizen Aubrey Dameron, a transgender woman who has been missing since March 2019. Quote, Pay introduced the bill and immediately got feedback from lawmakers that they absolutely would not support the bill being named for a transgender person. Because that's the important thing here, right?
Yeah.
That's the important thing here. Oh, God, it's so stupid. Okay, said Pam Smith, Dameron's aunt. With the bill named for Russell, HB 1790 received a due pass recommendation from the Safety Committee with a 6-2 vote. As of March 9th, it was awaiting assignment to the calendar for a floor vote in the House. Principal Senate author of the measure is Michael Brooks, Democrat from Oklahoma City. Smith's support for HB 1790 remains strong. Blah, blah, blah. So the Casey Alert Act would create and implement a statewide system to notify the public of a, quote, critically missing adult, end quote. It would consult with tribal governments along with state public safety agencies in developing the system. Media outlets would be used to send a Casey alert, and the state commissioner of public safety would coordinate the system. The bill defines a critically missing adult as a person aged 18 to 59, quote, whose whereabouts are unknown and who is believed to have been abducted or taken against his or her will, end quote. The bill outlines appropriate application of a Casey alert, including, quote, risk of abduction or being taken against a person's will, end quote, or a person that, quote, may not meet the definition of a critically missing adult, but whose safety would be best protected by the issuance of a Casey alert. Sending an alert would require law enforcement to enter applicable data into the National Crime Information Center, conduct an investigation into the disappearance, and collect, quote, identifying and other information about the critically missing adult that might be useful to the general public for the safe recovery of the person, end quote. So they can't call it the Aubrey alert, though.
Yeah.
We can't have it named for a transgendered woman. That would just
Ridiculous.
be terrible. Ugh. So dumb. I'm gonna see if there's been any movement on it.
And that probably stems from the fact that those Republicans didn't want to even get any momentum on it whatsoever, but they couldn't come out right and say that. So their way to stonewall it is by renaming it the Casey Act.
So dumb.
And notice that no other acts like this, like the Amber Alert, for example, are contingent upon that person's sexual orientation or gender identity.
No.
But
so I'm looking at the oklahomalegislature.gov website, and I cannot find whether or not it's passed or failed, or if it's still a thing, or I got nothing.
Well, is it a state bill or a federal bill?
No, it's a state bill. It's just for the state of Oklahoma.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. I'll try to see if I can find some more information on the actual act to see if it's been passed or implemented. I'm going to have to say I doubt it. But, who knows? Maybe they'll surprise me here. Yeah, there's nothing on here.
And those opposed to it would probably argue too, well, why should there be a special category of alert for missing Indigenous individuals? And it's not necessarily because they're Indigenous, it's because the problem is so huge among Indigenous populations and communities that's what necessitates it.
Yeah.
Um, it's not looking for some kind of, um, you know, exceptional status. It's named and meant to, it's named the way it is and structured the way it is to address a very real problem in material reality, but leave it to leave it to the usual suspects to
So petty and stupid. Rob left us $25 on the Rockfin.
oh,
Thanks, Rob. We
thank you,
love
Rob.
Rob. Rob is incredibly generous and very supportive of all of us, and I love Rob. So thank you for that.
Yes,
He said it's
absolutely.
unacceptable that we receive no tips. We're not here for tips, but thank you. We do appreciate you, Rob.
I agree.
Yeah,
It is unacceptable.
unacceptable. How am I supposed to grift if we
Yeah.
don't get any tips, you guys? Come on. Okay, so yeah, I'll do my best to try to find out more information on whether or not that has been passed. I doubt it. If it hasn't been passed, as Yona says too, if it hasn't, oh wait, no. Yeah. If it wasn't so prudent for this bill to pass, I would have been insistent they fight for it to be Aubrey on principle. It should be Aubrey. It should be the Aubrey
Yeah,
Act.
I agree.
Her family's the one that organized and created the legislation. It should absolutely be called the Aubrey Act. And it's really petty and stupid for it to be otherwise.
Yeah,
But,
and it's just another example of the ruling colonial government dictating the terms of how this is going to play out, and saying, we know better how this should be named. We know better than the Indigenous people, even though this is something that they're putting forward for a problem that's, I mean, you want to talk about a pandemic or an epidemic. This is it right here. This is actually one. So,
and
again,
a long-standing, ongoing. This has been going on for decades.
Yeah, but again, the colonizers stepping in and saying, "We know better."
Oh, so typical. Okay, so that's really about all of the information that we have for you on Aubrey. Again, you can find links to more information in the description box. I'm going to add the other things that I promised that I would add in there after we wrap this up. I just didn't have time earlier. I apologize for that. Mindy, I want to marry you for your money bags. They're full of grocery bags. You can have them. Yeah. So if you have any information about Aubrey's case, make sure to call the law enforcement office of your choice. I'm not sure it makes a difference which one, but you can try. And again, be a squeaky wheel. If you don't feel like they are taking whatever information you have seriously, keep bugging them. And please just share. You don't have to share this video. We're not trying to do this for clicks or whatever, but just share some information. Share the missing flyer, share the People article, share the article from, what was it called? Cherokee Phoenix. Share the Cherokee Phoenix article. I'm going to also add those two, the Broken podcast, that has the interview with one with her aunt, one with her uncle. Those are great interviews. Share this stuff, because the more people that get eyes and ears on it, the better. That's really the ideal situation. So share her picture, talk about hers. And in fact, in the one of the interviews, it was say her name. So say her name. She was a person. She deserves justice. Her life mattered and matters still.
Yeah.
So that's the best we can do, I guess, is just try to get the information out there.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody in the chat for hanging out with us. We appreciate you more than you know. And we will be back. Are we going to do this 2 weeks? Do you think 2 weeks was good? Okay.
2 weeks is good.
And again, if you guys have cases that you would like to see us cover that you don't think get enough coverage, then send them our way. We would love to have, I have a whole ass list, but I'm always open to new cases. So if you have something that you would like to see us cover, send it our way. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another depressing and horribly handled case. And yeah, of course, we'll be back on Friday for Facts on Friday as well. So Friday at 4:00, we'll be back for that. So and we have a couple interviews we're working on lining up too, which will be good. So just stay tuned for all that stuff. And we will see you next time. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
y'all.
See ya.